Restart your recording.
Yeah, I will. I had a problem with the Zoom going live. I think I caught it now, or excuse me, the YouTube. Yeah, so. Come on.
Restart your recording.
Yeah, I will. I had a problem with the Zoom going live. I think I caught it now, or excuse me, the well, rat poison. YouTube.
Restart your recording.
Yeah, I will.
Restart your.
Yeah, you're live. We're live on YouTube, so that part's good.
Yeah, I can't get the recording to
There you go. It's going.
keep.
Welcome to New Tracks Workshop. My name is Jim Kello. I'm the creator and host for New Tracks, where mentors help modelers build. Thanks so much for coming. I hope you come back often and tell your friends about our show. These Saturday workshops are a new project for New Tracks. They've resulted from comments I've received from modelers about scratch building and Chris Blackmar's interest in producing and leading this effort. The segments are structured like the popular build-along segments on our Wednesday evening shows, except these Saturday shows are designed to show modelers how to scratch build a model. I personally believe that scratch building is one of the most creative parts of model railroading, and I think you'll agree if you try it. Here is your opportunity to work with some skilled modelers to learn how to do it. You will learn the steps, the skills, the techniques involved in scratch building a model in any scale you want. There are no kits to buy, only the needed scratch building supplies. The plans that will be used for the model, you can download on your computer at no cost. The show's moderator, Chris Blackmar, is a very talented and artistic modeler, and he and his guest will guide you through the complete scratch building process, one small step at a time. After all, that's what mentoring is all about. If you're a beginner, I hope you'll join in and experience the thrill of completing a scratch-built model and being able to stand back and say, I built that. If you're a more experienced or advanced modeler, I hope you'll join in and offer your advice and knowledge to less skilled modelers and even get some fresh ideas yourself. The live shows will, of course, be recorded on our YouTube channel, so you can refer to the information later if you need to. In addition, I hope you'll visit our website, newtracksmodeling.com, and subscribe. You'll need to confirm your email that you received to verify your address. And after that, you'll receive all of the notice of our future shows, as well as the login links to attend. If you would prefer to watch the series on YouTube, you can do that by going to our channel, New Tracks Modeling, ring the bell, and click all. Therefore, you'll get all of the notice for the start of all of our future shows on the channel. If you can spare a little time, I hope you'll consider joining our management team to help us plan and produce any of our future shows. Please contact me at jimkello@newtracksmodeling.com and let's discuss your interest. So welcome to the New Tracks Workshop. I look forward to seeing your finished models and of course, hearing any suggestions for future shows you may have. Now, here is Chris Blackmar to start your scratch building journey. Welcome.
All right. Well, let's get this show on the road here. Sorry for the issues of getting it kicked off today. You know, one of those Zoom type interface things with YouTube. Anyway, I think we're going now. So if it looks right to everybody, I want to thank you for joining us. Today, just a couple of announcements. First of all, Father Pat is not here today. He had some other obligations, so we will not have an invocation today. So I'm just going to continue moving forward. The second item I wanted to bring up is if you are interested in soft pastels, don't forget about the 10% discount code at DecoArt. Again, that's good just for a little bit longer here. And finally, if you are interested in obtaining one of the ice making machines for an interior, if you're building along with us and you're doing an interior, we do have a modeler who is 3D printing a couple of those, and they'll be in either O scale or HO scale. And if you're interested in getting that, go on ahead and let me know if you are in the US. If you are in Canada, I will connect you to Heath and he can ship it out directly. If you're interested in obtaining one of those units and you're in the US, I'm trying to get 2 or 3 orders together so that we can just do one single shipping across the country lines, state lines, whatever you want to call them here. And then I'll go on ahead and distribute them from this side. It's to keep the cost down since Heath is doing this out of the goodness of his heart. Heath will also be making those files available for 3D printing on the New Tracks website underneath the workshop page once he gets them finally tweaked. Okay, and with that, I guess the final announcement is I wanted to apologize for the rude cutoff last week. I ran into a little bit of an issue, and for those of you that were there know about it. And other than that, we're just going to move forward. So I guess, first of all, is there any questions that came up from anybody from last week or anything? Feel free to speak up, because again, this is a show for all of us. And Greg, I'm going to put you on the spot right off the top, Greg Cassidy, and ask you what you've been working on this past week here, just kind of break the ice this morning.
Well, for those of you that are familiar with New Tracks, you know Chris Corse, who runs Conowingo Models, and just last week I started a little Doodlebug kit that he put out, which is a wooden body and chassis that goes over an old AHM 35-ton mechanism. And I've gotten as far as refreshing the mechanism because it was so old. As I was starting to take things apart, they actually fell apart. But I'm all done with that now, and I'm ready to start actually building the building part, which I'm looking forward to.
Cool. All right. Well, when you get down to the chalk weathering and your pigment weathering, let us know on that one. And let's see here. Who else have we got going here? Neil Harwicki. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Neil, what are you working on? You're not part of the normal folks that I see on here all the time.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah. And
Okay.
what are you working on these days?
Well, I get a lot of my ideas from Shorpy. And I spent a lot of time on Shorpy's site looking at old buildings. And I started one, I'm about 2/3 through it. It's only going to be a front piece because I'm not quite sure what I'm going to wind up doing with it. So probably in a couple of weeks, I'll have something I can show if people are interested. And I do suggest if people want to sort of get away from the cellulose influence, which I love, and I've built many things based on his work. But I'm starting to get interested in 1930s other types of buildings made of brick, made of cinder block. And this one is sort of a cinder block that's scratch built. It has some problems. I'm still working on it. I'm not saying I'm successful yet, but it's coming along.
Okay, and so it's kind of a brick structure, cinder block structure type thing. So are you building it in styrene, in wood, in plaster?
Well, this is the first time I've tried this. I usually use wood, sheeting. And I decided I wanted to try something really different. And I wanted something made out of either cinder block or smooth stone. So what I did is I took some strip wood, I doubled it over, glued it one piece on top of another, very thin. I don't remember the measurements. Made long strips, cut into pieces. So I actually had 82 pieces of this cinder block. And then I put that over a cardboard template. I measured it from one of the Shorpy pictures. And there's some mistakes in it that I have to try to fix. But I'll tell you, it looks pretty good. And one of the things that really attracted me to the structure is because the pictures were straight on. And it had a real big banner type of sign. And it's black and white. Most of Shorpy is in black and white. And I put it on my Elements photo editor, and I did some coloring on it. And I just love the sign. The sign grabs it. And it's like a repurposed building, probably 5 times over. And it has a lot of ornamental things on it that don't actually go along with the purpose it is for now. So I'd be really happy to show it, even if it's a failure. I'd like to show it to you because sometimes when I really got the urge to build something, I get into it and I'm so enthusiastic, I overlook a lot of things. So that's why I'm considering it possibly a passer, but I think it's going to be a failure. So I'll show it when things come.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Well, that's interesting. Interesting way to address the creation of the stone and things. Personally, I would have grabbed a block of balsa foam and scribed it, but that's a different approach I had never heard of, and sounds like a real interesting build. I'm going to be real interested to see what you come up with here. And
I think it's going to wind up as a background building, but okay.
Well, hey, if you can make use of them, that's all that really counts. And then how about Bill Stimpson? Let's get 3 of you out there and see with the 3, and then we'll get into something from my side. And Bill Stimpson, if you can unmute yourself and let us know the scale and what you might be working on.
I'm working in N scale and building some small buildings that I found in Thomas York's Friholy Flat sketchbook.
Oh, cool. And which volume are you using? Volume 1 or volume 2?
They're actually out of both.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I've got the hotel from 2 and the town from 1 that I'm working on.
Okay, that hotel, I've actually, I myself was working on that, and it kind of got put on a little bit of a hold here, but I was using a downtown deco kit for the base, and I was board by board and with interior framing, etc., for the upper part of that second story on that one. But yeah, those are really interesting buildings. If people haven't seen the Thomas York sketchbooks, if you ever get an opportunity to pick one up, they're well worth their cost of admission, so whatever it may be. So they're absolutely outstanding ideas. So it's real close to the Jerome type of thing, or I don't know. It's just, they're just interesting. Okay, well, with that, let me tell you what I've been working on. I'm going to go on ahead and move my computer here and put it up above so that you guys can see my desktop. And I'll point it down here, and Will, if you can go on ahead and okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Well, last time when we quit, I had just some walls that I was putting together, and I went on ahead and did some bracing on the back of them, and I colored them. And the bracing that I used, quite frankly, is kind of weird stuff. I used 12 by 14s from Kapler Wood. And I know that's an oddball size. It's actually more for bridging, but it's what I had handy on the desktop. So I just used that for my back on my bracing. And I just went through and did some quick bracing on all of this stuff. So you can kind of see what I've done here on some the bigger walls. Again, this is 1/32, so it's real thin. I went on ahead, and this is scribed. You can see the scribing in it. And I just went through and did some 29-cent bracing on it. And so I went through and did the bracing on everything. The one piece we're going to have to kind of watch, if you will recall, is this piece, which I broke off this little bit right here, trying to show this piece off in the cuts when we were discussing that. And all of this has been colored so far with a diluted alcohol and isopropyl alcohol. I use a 99% dilution, and then I used some of the Hunterline yellow ochre. It's probably about a 5 to 8 to 1 alcohol to yellow ochre, so I diluted their stain. And I then went through and used 2 soft pastel chalks. I used this color here, which is kind of a gray, blue gray. And then I used a white that is a gray white. It's a cream gray white. Colors aren't showing up real well here, but This pastel, I believe, is a garrote. And this one, I believe, is a Terry Ludwig. And so again, DecoArt, Railroad 10 for a 10% discount if you're interested in obtaining any of the soft pastels that you normally cannot get through some of the other houses like Dick Blick and things. They are a specialty, and they will go on ahead and give us a discount on any of the brands except for the Terry Ludwig. The only reason that the Terry Ludwig pastels are not being covered underneath that is Terry Ludwig's office got hit pretty hard by COVID, and they're over 2 months behind on their shipping of pastels, because all of those are handmade, if you will recall. All right. So I went through, just drew the pastels onto the siding here. I then took a dabber, and the dabber that I used is just one of these type of things, shoe polish things. You can get these either in a bag of like 50 of them for $10 or something off of Amazon or something. Or if you buy like a shoe dye, these often comes in the leather dyes, these dabbers. And so I just went through and took my mixture after I had put the pastel, drawn the pastel on. I just went through and used a stippling motion and applied that to all of the siding so that it was totally wet. I kept the siding vertical and let it kind of run. I did it on a paper towel, and then when I got done, I just took it and lightly pressed it on the paper towel face down to remove the excess. And I went through and did that for all of the siding. And then I went back and I took the Hunterline driftwood and I stuck my brush, which again, always use a cheap brush when you're using pastels, because they will eat up brushes. And this is just kind of one of those glue application brushes. It's a cheap brush. And then I went through, dipped this into the driftwood, and then I tapped it to lightly unload it on a paper towel. And then I dipped it into my yellow stain again. And then I went through and stippled and pulled it down. Or in the case of the siding that's clapboard, I went up and then stood it on in for a couple of moments to let any excess come off, and then again dropped it face down on top of the paper towel to wick off any excess. I then took my handy dandy toothbrush, dipped it in some clear alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and then lightly brushed over all of the siding. And that brings you up to date. I might say that when I added the stuff originally up on front with the dapper, I also went on the backside and flooded the backside. That's just to keep everything from warping as much. And even though with the bracing, I didn't anticipate any real warping. But that's kind of where I'm standing right now. So if you will recall, this is the weathering that I'm kind of going after, and I'm going to have to get some better pictures out, and I will be getting those out to Will here probably mid this week, so that Will can try to find a place excuse me, to put them on our website if anybody's really interested in seeing what the real colors look like. Because quite frankly, I'm using a cell phone and my colors don't come through all that cleanly. The cell phone is to show the desktop. So anyway, hopefully you can kind of see the difference here. So I'm down to the point where I'm using the driftwood straight up and some alcohol. And I'm just going to go through and I am going to shake the driftwood a couple of times. And I got to ask Rick Marine what they use to glue their caps down the interior part of that cap. Mine comes loose and I got to find out what they're using on that when we start to build. For those that may not be aware, Rick and Marine are going to be doing a build of one of their Queen Post covered bridges here on the Wednesday show upcoming soon. So you may want to tune in for that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a paper towel, put my thing down here. First time through, I'm just going to wet my brush and then I'm going to come in here, dip it. I'm going to unload it and then I'm going to kind of come up, and this is leaving a little bit heavier streaking than I want. So I think I'm going to go over to my fan brush. So this is the nice thing about using pastels and stains. And when you use multiple passes, you always want to sneak up on your colors. So don't try to color everything in one pass. Don't expect it to be colored in a single pass. So I'm going to get out a fan brush. I use a Silverwhite fan brushes. These are, quite frankly, a little bit more expensive. This is a number 2, but they have a good bristle that when you get these things wet, you can start getting the bristle to kind of get into the, let's see here. You can kind of see it here. And what you want to do is play with it a little bit until it kind of like splays out and you get these little like clumps of hairs. Okay. And then you just very lightly use the brush to apply your coloring, and that'll give you some nice streaking. So getting it into the bottle here is kind of difficult. I take it, set it down, and then tip it and drop it in, unload it, and then I'm going to streak it up. And I don't know if you can see the streaking on that, but I'm going to do a little bit heavier at the bottom. And I'm just going to come up and I'm going to go through and do that to everything. And while I'm doing that, Pat, I know that you do a little bit of work with soft pastels and weathering. How do you use some of the weathering and soft pastels on your chores here while I'm kind of going through, get somebody else's input?
Is that on the wood that you're talking about, or is it on?
Whatever materials you tend to use, if you use some other materials, how are you doing that?
I don't know if you can see this or not. Can you see it all right?
I'm able to see it.
Yeah, it's wood. And I use the pastels on the wood. And I use the brush with a mixture of alcohol, 97%. And I just brush it straight down. And I thin it out a little bit where I want it to be blotchy like that. And basically, that's the way it turned out. Right off the, I put the pastels in a little paint tray. And then I use some alcohol next to it, and I just put a brush in the alcohol, and then I just touch it on the pastels, and I will kind of brush it on, and then just heavier at the top because that's where it stays better, and then lighter at the bottom. But you can change it by adding a little alcohol to your brush and then brushing it out a little bit. It works good on wood that way. And I did the same thing to the roof. Okay.
Okay.
And then I did the same thing to the interior with the black. Now I did paint the details on the workbench. So I don't know how well you can see that. And it's fun working with pastels. Once you get onto it, it's not so bad.
Okay.
And I did
And
the
this-
rust on the hinges.
And the scale that you're showing us there, is that HO or O?
That is old scale.
Okay, okay. All right, and let's see here. Does anybody have any other thoughts about what Pat just said?
I'm open for questions.
I'm trying to buy a little bit of time here.
That's okay.
And,
This was done on rosin, plastics, and metal. With the pastel. But I painted it with the primer, gray primer.
okay,
That gave us
you
some-
went soft on us there again, so can barely hear you, Pat.
Okay, that's on rosin and metal.
Okay,
And the metal was done with the pastels, and so was the rosin. Now, before I put the pastels on, I used a base coat of gray primer. It's called primer. We get it at Canadian Tire here in Canada. And Clark went nuts on buying every can he could find at the time, so he wants to learn how to do it himself. But that's all done with pastels on the gray primer.
okay. Yeah, cool. Looks good. Looks
Thank you.
good. All right. Well, thank you for the input. Will, if you can highlight my desktop again, please. And what I wanted to show is I've got the clapboard wall here, and I'm going to go through this one more time. Again, this is straight driftwood. I lightly unload the brush, and I'm starting from the bottom and going up. But the reason I'm doing that this way and with this wood, excuse me, is it's going to capture the raised edges of the clapboard. And right there at the base, or the part that sticks out the most. And that's going to weather that a little bit more with that driftwood color. And that's how I'm getting that on the clapboards. Whenever you're weathering stuff, always think in advance about where the things tend to weather. And if you've got a picture in front of you, that's always really, really helpful. I would strongly recommend never weather without a picture in front of you, as I'm doing. But to be quite honest, midweek, I went through and double checked a couple of pictures just to make sure. And plus I've done this so many times that I kind of know the process I wanted to show. So anyway, so I've gone through and done all of the walls so far. So I've got the walls basically what I call my base weathering on the walls. So now we come down to a question in the, I need to make up my own instructions since this is a scratch build of the next step. Do I go through and put on my wall trim and then paint the back sides if I'm going to paint the interior here to hide it, or to make it more uniform and not reflect light? Or do I go through and color my edging at this point in time? Because when you put your walls together, you're going to have some sort of an edging going along that wall. And you can't really see it, but there's a small little piece that sticks out. It's probably 1/32 of an inch thick. And so you gotta
Chris,
think
if I
about
can
how
offer
you
my
do that.
my idea,
Go on ahead.
I think the first thing would be, depending on how you're going to paint the interior, if you're going to spray it, then I definitely do it before you attach any of the corner trim or any other kind of trim. If you're going to brush paint it, it shouldn't matter as much. But I usually like to take care of anything that's going to affect the walls and make sure they're stabilized before I start doing any kind of joining of corner trim or anything like that, so that they don't then change and kind of pull away from it or something.
Okay.
But that's just me.
That was exactly the input that I was looking to have, because that's like a page right out of my playbook. How about anybody else? Anybody else have any ideas, thoughts, or other any other thoughts about any of that? Okay, well, I like Greg tend to spray paint. I would normally spray paint this, but before I'd spray paint it, there's one other step that I would do, and that's I would cover the front of this just so that with some tape, I would basically do some cheap masking is what I'm saying, so that I don't get any spray coming underneath where I've got it stuck down or when I'm holding it, so that there's no overspray, if you will. So I'm gonna, on my holes, I'm gonna go through and just add some, I've got some Tamiya tape. This stuff is real low tack, so I can put it on the fronts here, and it's hardly going to pull off any pastel, quite frankly, because it is so low tack. That's one of the things that using a Tamiya type thing, Tamiya masking tape or painting tape, it's a real low tack type of thing. And I'm just throwing that on. I'm just doing a couple of real cheap things. And I'm just going to go through and real quick, like add some of this to, I'm going to brush paint it on instead of spray paint it, but I'd normally spray paint it. But for today, I'm just going to use some neutral gray, and this is just a cheap craft paint. Now, I normally really downplay craft paints. The only place that I find them of any value is like if I'm doing something that I just want to seal it, and it's going to be totally out of view, and I'm just going to slop it on pretty heavy. And the other place is in weathering or coloring of scenery. Other than that, I tend to really avoid the cheap pastels for multiple reasons. Number one, the cheap pastels use cheaper pigments and pigment grinds. They also sometimes will blend a little bit to get the colors that they want. So you don't really know the real pigment colors that are in here. They could be using a dark green or it could be a dark blue. And that's going to have different effects if I'm using other colors and trying to mix something. So that's the first reason I don't use them for like painting castings and things of that nature. Number two is that the binder in these is really a cheap binder, and you've got to, if you're doing any dilution of them, you've got to add some other binder to it. And I've run into problems in the past where even though I added a second binder to thinned out paint, it still chips reasonably easy. So I don't tend to use it. Number three, they don't really dry to a matte in general. They dry to a semi-matte. So I just tend to avoid them. The biggest reason being, however, is that because of their binders and things, they just don't really do a real good job of binding to materials unless it's something kind of porous. So I'm going to use this on wood, and I'm going to get out my paint tray. Now, for my paint trays or paint palettes, one of the things I tend to use is either Altoid's tins or Sucrets tins. Keep a couple of these handy. The reason being is I can throw some water into one side and then it forms a natural, because it's tilted, it forms a natural type of a little area for me to separate my paints on. And I just use these all the time. So I'm just going to throw some water in here. It happens to be distilled water. Normally in Colorado, I did not use distilled water, but I've moved down to Arizona and my water down here is not good. So I do use just some distilled water in this case. And this is where it'd be handy. Daryl showed us a vibrating Oscillator paint mixer. I gave mine away before I moved down here, and quite frankly, that was a mistake. And so if you see his video, I would highly recommend getting one. And I'm just going to go on ahead and pour a little bit out here. Boy, everybody is so quiet out there. How about you guys' thoughts on cheap craft paints and where to use them? While I'm painting this, I'm sure you guys have all seen this. So let's talk about something else here and talk about the use of cheap craft paints while you're painting. And by the way, I'm dipping into my water and then here, and I'm just kind of thinning it down on my brush as I go. With that, I'm going to shut up and let somebody else talk about their experiences, thoughts, and things on craft paints.
It's Pat here. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, go on ahead.
Okay, I've used craft paints before, but I also use Windex without the ammonia base for the water instead of plain water or distilled water.
Okay.
It made a difference.
Yeah.
Have you ever used the windshield washer? And it has to be the blue, not the red. It has to be the blue. Have you ever used that?
No, I haven't.
Has anybody out there used that as a thinner?
I have, because it's just, it's cheap. Where I use craft paints is my outdoor railroad.
Okay. And have you ever seen that blue tint affect anything? I know a lot of people are really scared of doing it because of that blue coloring. They think it's going to come through.
No, it doesn't.
Truthfully, outdoors, I don't really worry about it. And with the ultraviolet light, and being out there with nature, it's going to change fast anyway.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, Chris, I had a question for Patrick.
Okay.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
Patrick, I was interested in, you're putting primer on plastic so you can then put the pastels on it. Now,
Yeah.
what would you do? I mean, I have some really old plastic models, cheap ones that don't work. I'm talking about locomotives. Would you just spray the locomotive with the primer? Because
I've never done it
Go
on a
ahead.
locomotive. Never done it on the locomotive, but spray your primer on as a base for your powders to take a bite on. If you
Yeah.
don't do that, it won't bite at all.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just always afraid of, using a spray can on a plastic locomotive. It's not going to be very even, and I'm not into, what do you call it?
Experiment on an old box
Silverwhite.
car or something. That'll give you an idea.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Will,
It works.
if you can highlight my desktop for me here, I'm going to talk about painting technique for just a brief moment. For the newbies out there, it's kind of like, okay, he's just painting this thing real quick. But there's a trick to painting so that you don't get any of this coming over the edges and onto the front. And so I'm just using a cheaper, looks to be about a number 2, maybe brush, soft round brush. But if you paint so that you come up and off of the edges, the edge here doesn't really get painted, but you've got paint on the back. And then that way you don't get it coming over into the front. And then you can come and wipe your brush. Come on. Everything's 180 degrees backwards for me. So you kind of brush this way. My point being is that if you brush like this, you do not get any paint on the front, but you can paint all your edges and things. And if you are following the same methodology in painting around windows and things of that nature, what you can do is just come, whenever you come up to an edge, always go the opposite way away from it, and instead of up and down it as much as possible. That's a real tight corner there, but that way you avoid getting paint on the backside surface. So if you're spraying, the trick is to go through and mask it like I showed over here on this one, and to apply a come on, apply a little bit of a mask to the front side. And you can do that even if you're brush painting. But if you don't want to mask it, you can go through and use your brush technique to avoid getting it on the front.
Hey, Chris, one thing that I was explaining once to some people about when they were thinking about brush painting, especially with craft paints, which are kind of thick and your brush is often kind of heavily loaded. You think of if you've ever gone out and gotten your boots muddy, when you're scraping the mud off your boots, that's basically what you're doing. And you know how if you scrape the mud off the boots, it all stays on one side and none of it gets on the other side of whatever you're scraping it on, a 2x4 or your stoop or anything like that. And it's kind of the same with a loaded brush.
Yeah, exactly. So good way to explain it. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this? Now, you may ask, why am I bothering going through and doing this? For those that may not have done a whole lot of kit building or anything like this, it serves a few purposes. Number one, if you use a kind of darker gray type of a color, it will help make the interior of your structures a little bit less visible if you're not going to put in an interior and you don't want it displayed. The other thing is it disperses the light a little bit better. Now, I do accent all of this with a partitions, and I'll go through that when we get to that point. And that's just so that you can't see through the buildings. But you want to use a darker gray, blue-gray preferably. The reason being is that shadows are blue. They are not black. A lot of people think, oh, I'll just apply some black paint. And if you apply just black paint, it can actually be a little bit of a reflective type thing versus if you use a dark gray type of paint. The other thing about using and painting the back sides of this, and I'm doing this with an acrylic, is to help seal the wood. This will also help the model in the long run if you're in an area particularly where it's a humid type climate. Changes in humidity can affect your model, believe it or not. And so that will help seal the wood all the way around. The third thing is for some of the other future weathering we may be doing, where we may be flooding the front sides a little bit, you want to seal it so that the backside, so that it'll help prevent the warping. One of the problems with craft paints, and I just went through and hit it on the backside, is that, like Greg explained, you pull it across and your brush, and when you're pulling it across, you get a raised edge going along the backside. So make sure you go through and just run the brush over that briefly once to get rid of that. With that, I'm going to shut up and let somebody else talk about their thoughts on craft paints and usage and thoughts, whatever, or brush techniques. Boy, go on ahead.
I found the biggest culprit for getting paint on the front of your building is your fingers. You get it on your fingers, you get a real mess.
I concur. I absolutely concur.
And
Okay.
Pat, it's not just paint. How much glue have you gotten in places that shouldn't have?
You got that right.
You're absolutely right. Okay, I'm going to go through and just slop on some paint. And if you mask, it's easier. You notice that I went through and did the technique through, but you can put your mask down and kind of come through. And if you push this down on a surface on your mask where you masked it, it makes it a lot easier to just come through. And I've painted the edges. I did that on the other openings. I don't know if you saw it, but by putting on that mask, you can go through and it just makes it a little bit easier to paint. You don't have to be as careful. And then just as soon as I can, I like to remove my mask from the front side. And wouldn't you know it, the one time I talk about it, I didn't have it sealed. Oh, that's fun. Okay, well. I can make sure you push down. I apparently did not push down on my thing here, and so I got a little bit of leakage on the front. So not a big deal. We'll deal with it here. It's probably going to be 90% covered up with the frame on the door if I once I add that. So, you know, when you make a boo-boo, don't worry about them. The art of modeling and being a good modeler is learning 88 different ways to hide your mistakes. So, because there is not one modeler that I know who's a good modeler that doesn't have multiple mistakes and boo-boos on every single model. It's just how well they hide them and the techniques they use to hide them. So, yeah, that time it worked. So you can see the differences between the two. It helps to push down on the front end to seal your mask. I apparently did not do that. So live and learn. Memory, pressures of doing something live, right? So it's the type of thing you talk about when you're in a group of guys who are building a model or modeling around.
Well, it always goes well if you're recording it and go back and redo it, but live, if it's going to mess up, that's where it's going to mess up.
Yeah. Well, you know, but that's one of the reasons I'm doing this live is to show that, you know, all of us make errors and boo-boos and everything else. And the very best modelers I know, everybody always thinks, oh, they go through and they whip out these perfect models the first time. And, you know, for an awful lot of the good modelers out there, I'll make you bet that they built that individual model 5 times before they finally got all the pieces right. By the time they go through and add stuff and tear it off and say, I got to redo this.
You're absolutely right. We have a fellow in our group. He builds winning structures that he enters in contests. Doors and that. He's rebuilt the doors, all individual boards on diagonals and such. Oh, maybe up as much as 10 times. The best thing about it, I get the cast-offs.
Yeah, well, you know, and that's the thing. If you get attached to a group of modelers and things that are doing that type of thing, you can be the recipient of a lot of things. I kind of go through and the models that I build because I don't have a layout per se, I do modules. If I build something that I normally am not going to use, I'll just donate it to a club or something. And those guys are almost always happy to get models. And, you know, there's always people that want background models. And if you can't use them as a background model or you're not that happy with them, feel free to use them as particularly smaller type things like windows and doors and things as spare parts, scenery parts, and throw them around for scenery pieces. And that will help out on that. Let's see here. Hey, Will, how are we doing on time at this point?
You are bang on the 1 hour mark.
Hey, well, I guess that kind of brings me up to a point that I was going to tell everybody that I believe the next My Build show is going to be coming up on the next Wednesday, New Tracks. And for those of you that have not participated or are not familiar with it, the My Build is where you go through and send Chris, and I can maybe get his email posted here for you, but send him a couple of pictures of what you're building. And it does not have to be a completed model. In progress is actually wonderful and is appreciated. And not only will you get to briefly discuss and show off what you're building and get some feedback, but you can also get your thing published into the resource O-Scale or S-Scale magazine. And you can go tell your family, you know, hey, I'm not just doing a hobby at this point. I'm actually being published in magazines. So gives you an excuse to participate, because when you go on ahead and throw it in, I know Jim and the guys are trying to get that stuff the pictures posted in the resource magazines. And since they, O and S-Scale Resource Magazine is sponsoring the My Build, I'm gonna let the sponsor break do its thing, and I'm gonna go on ahead and paint the next backside thing. And Chris, or excuse me, Will, I'll turn it over to you for a few seconds here.
Welcome to the world of scale, O and S railroading. We are your resource for all O and S scale modeling. Both our magazines are advertiser supported and free to read online, download as a PDF, or even print. All advertisers are hot linked to their website, so if you see something you like, just click. Please check out our websites for the current issues. All back issues available free for the O-Scale Resource and the S-Scale Resource magazines. And, if you are a manufacturer, distributor, or retail establishment, please contact us through our website for advertising opportunities.
Okay, and I'm back. Let's see here. Any other thoughts going on? Now, one other brush technique that I'm using here, like I said, I had this palette, if you will, where it separates out. At this point, I don't have to overload my brush, and this is really thin clapboard siding. I think it's 1/32 of an inch, and I can, just by brushing it on here, and then I just remove any excess on the back side here, and then I can kind of paint that edge real quickly, and it's good to go. Sorry, folks. And so that's kind of the back side for whatever it's worth. Okay. And I'm not putting it on super thick. And then that way it does kind of dry reasonably quick. Now, in paints, don't forget there's two types of drying. This is something we'll talk about more when we get into more advanced issues, but there's basically the type of dry that's called touch dry. And that's when you get a paint that once it's applied, and it's like 3 or 4, 5 minutes, a half an hour into it, whatever it takes for the binding and the solvents to evaporate and kind of set up, that'll give you the where you can pick it up and not leave your fingerprint in it. And then there's what's called cure dry. And cure dry is when the paint has actually had an opportunity to totally dry, create its crystalline structure or net together, if you will, the particles and the binders and everything. And that's when you know what you've got. So like with most acrylics that we use, it's 24 to 36 hours to really cure dry. And then you can go through and see if it's going to chip on you or kind of test it out. If you just have a touch dry, you'll find that you can scrape acrylic paints with your fingernail and leave impressions and things of that nature. So just be aware of when you're handling your different materials that you may have painted with various types of paints, that you've got different drying times, and just kind of think about that in the process of what you're doing, because all of that's going to come into play and potentially affect what your overall effects are, and any issues that you may be having with the paints if you're using paints. Let's see here. The same thing goes for any coating material like dull coat or any fixatives that you may be adding. Be aware that you've got a cure and a total dry time, or a touch dry and a cure dry. Let's see here. What else can I kind of say about the brush control? The other thing, as I'm doing this, I'm trying to remember all of this stuff as I'm going through the very first time for total newbies. So bear with me on some of this stuff, because most of you guys probably know this. But periodically go through, even in the process of painting, go through and kind of clean your brush a little bit. That'll help you maintain a smooth paint flow. Paint does tend to dry up in your brush as you're going up through it, and even though you're using other paints or keep adding it to your paintbrush, fresh paint off of your palette here, it does tend to build up on the brush and dry out a little bit. The other thing is, and I didn't show it too well, but you really don't want to get paint totally up to the metal end here. It's called the ferrule. You want it just down to about 2/3 when you load your brush, and because that'll also help keep the paint out of that furrow. Once it gets up into the furrow, it's kind of hard to get it cleaned out of there. And then what happens is, as the paint dries, particularly acrylics, well, it doesn't really matter, acrylics or oils, it will tend to widen out a little bit. And as it's at the base up here, what happens is that widening out then causes your paintbrush down low to splay, or to spread the bristles out. And that's when most people find that they are having an issue with their paintbrush, and they've destroyed a paintbrush. So if you go out and spend $5 or $6 on a reasonable, $8 or $10, $12 on a reasonable paintbrush, instead of our 29-cent craft variety kitty brushes, you'll not only have a better painting experience, but you do have to take a little bit of time to keep them in proper working order. And that's not getting paint into that furrow is just one of those little tricks that you learn over time that a lot of people just don't talk about for some reason. Any other paint brush tricks that we can throw in at this point? That
Chris, I'd like to get, if anybody else has any input. For the last few years, I've been using Masters brush cleaner anytime I've painted with the brush and had it loaded for a little bit. And my brushes seem to last, but I don't know if it's because of that or the other care I'm taking. I'm wondering if other people have had experience with it.
I can tell you that I use that. I've actually, in my medicine cabinet in my bathroom, I have 3 little jugs of that stuff. Or it comes in like a little pan or soap cakes, and they're little round things. And yes, I use them all the time. If you get paint on your fingers, by the way, you can scrub that brush around in the soap dish with that master soap dish, if you will. The brush cleaner, it comes off on the brush like a little soap. You rub it on your finger, the bristles. Not only does it clean the brush, but it'll also clean your fingers.
So I don't have to use sandpaper.
Yeah, and I will tell you that if you use it too much on your fingers, you'll find about 2 hours later your fingers get sore, because that stuff does actually, it's pretty abrasive, although it doesn't feel like it is. But yeah, that's a real good cleaning technique, and it will get a lot of paint out of the furrows, quite frankly, as long as you haven't let it really super cure dry in there for an eternity. It will kind of get it out. The other thing that I use to help preserve my brushes are about every three or four cleanings, I will take some hair conditioner, just the wife's hair conditioner, and I dilute it down about 50-50, and I will stick my brush in that and kind of clean it out, particularly if they are a natural type brush. And that will help the hair regain some of its moisture. And you'll actually find that your brush comes back to life a little bit better. It gives it that snap that you typically lose over brushes. When you're buying a brush, the thing that you're looking for is how well the brush, if you do this type of thing to it, it'll snap. And that snap will tell you kind of some of the quality of that brush. And even it's the same brand, same type of brush, you'll find between brushes, if you go into an art store, that there'll be different snaps off of a given brand, even a given type. And so you want the ones that can kind of snap the most back into place. That's about the only tip I can give you on buying brushes. Any other thoughts?
Yes, Chris. Buying a cheap brush.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I say, if you buy a cheap brush, you'll find out a lot of the hairs will end up in your paint.
Right. And that's just because of the glue that they use. Also, they are not cut even. And I just stabbed the backside of this. Boy, I'm having a tough time today. When they go through and cut them, they don't bind them quite as well as some of the other bindings that are used. And yeah, the cheaper brushes, not only do they not work real well, what's called a pilot bristle, I think it's called a pilot bristle. It's one that sticks out kind of beyond all the other bristles, and it helps form the path that the brush is going to take. That is not oftentimes secured very well, and it will come out, and then your brush doesn't really work that well thereafter. It's amazing if you buy 10 or 12, if you spend $10 or $12 on a brush and you use that for a little while, and then you pick up a cheap brush and try to use it, you will find a substantial difference in brushes. And the quality of your painting work, as well as the total overall enjoyment. And the enjoyment comes from the additional control that you get with the higher quality brush. So the bottom line that I'm saying here is I would not really recommend going out and spending 70 or 80 bucks on a Koloski, I believe that's how it's pronounced. If somebody knows the proper pronunciation, please correct me. Koloski brush. They're the highest quality brushes out there, but you pay 50, 60, 70 bucks a brush. I don't think we need to spend that on a sable brush, but a $10, $15 sable brush or $8 to $12 synthetic brush probably will get us through, and you'll find that there is a substantial difference between that brush and the brush that you pay $2 for a pack of 6 of them. And we were talking earlier about getting paint on the front side. I've been sitting here holding this. I didn't realize it, but I had paint on the edges of my fingers and I dipped it over the front. So, you know, it's just one of those days, but those will be covered up with fascia, or fascia. I'm not worried about that. And we'll just continue moving forward. Like I said, there's
Chris?
88 different ways to hide everything. Yes, sir.
We've got a question from YouTube. Well, I know the answer, but I think an explanation on your part is going to be maybe requested. It's from Ralph Renzetti. His question is, did you put paint on the corner glue points for the next wall?
Did I put paint on what?
On the corners where you're going to be gluing it to another wall.
Where I'm going to be gluing it? Yes, I did. And quite frankly, that could be a mistake. And it could add to less of a secure joint on down the road. It's probably, boy, I'm getting paint all over everything. Where that question is going, I'm sure, has to do with glue techniques and glue. And the fact that if you cover that, your edges, that you're going to be gluing to one another, you're going to have glue going to paint versus wood going to wood in my case. It will affect your joint. That's a very good point. And if I was doing a higher quality or doing this really correctly, I probably should not have added the glue to those edges, or excuse me, the paint to those edges. And he's talking about these edges here. That's a real good point. If you're painting your edges, be thinking about where you may be gluing in the future to get a better glue joint. Do not paint those because you've got glue and then the wood, and then you've got the paint, and it's going to affect that joint. So it's just, you know, it's a good point, Ralph, and thank you for pointing that out. Or Pat, excuse me, on that, because you're absolutely 100% correct. But for what I'm trying to show here, I'm just going to go through and work with it. I've got a couple of boo-boos going on this right here, where I stabbed my finger with glue, or excuse me, with paint.
Chris, those aren't boo-boos. You're just pre-weathering.
Most people would call it a boo-boo. So I've got some of this stain that I've got going here. So I'm going to unload the stain, and I'm just going to, and again, this stain is real light. And
You need to move your hand to the left a little.
so all I'm doing is just kind of adding some weathering to this thing. And or some of the stain to it, and that'll help blend some of that paint in that I wiped off a little bit there in the chalks. And then if I need to re-chalk it, I can re-chalk it real quick. That's one of the nice things about this type of thing. And we'll see what's going on. And then the other thing is, later on, if I need to, I'll just come back and add in a sign or something over it to hide that potential mistake or error or whatever. But this is just to kind of show you, and you can see that it's kind of drying, but where the real error is right here. And it's just that right there. This other stuff is just all kind of wet, and because I didn't want to do the stain in an individual place, you want to kind of come across and keep your weathering even across whatever surface it is, so it looks kind of uniform. Let's see here. What else have we got going here? And kind of with that, what time are we at there, Will?
20 after.
20 after,
So
okay.
you've been going for an hour and 20 minutes.
Yep. And so I think I'm coming up at a real good breaking spot for today. But let me go around and ask if there's any other questions that anybody had, or any other thoughts about bracing, painting the bracing, painting the interior, colors to use on interiors. What else did we cover today? Mixing of pre-made or pre-manufactured weathering stains. And soft pastels in general. Anybody have?
Chris, I've got another question cycling back to paint brushes, and something that my wife pointed out. For quite a while, whenever I would sit down to do a bunch of painting, I would start out with a fresh container of pretty warm water to wash my brush out in, but she said I probably shouldn't, because that might be affecting the glue holding the brush together. I'm wondering what other people's thoughts are on this.
I would concur with your wife on that. I definitely not hot water.
Everyone always picks her side.
Yeah, but I would tend to go along with what she has said there. My wife, who's a professional artist, just happened to walk by and she's nodding her head. Yeah, you don't want to use hot water on your brushes. So,
All right, well, I will make sure now that it's lukewarm at best.
I'm sorry?
Clean them with Murphy's oil soap.
Oh,
It cleans and conditions.
okay. She's also given me another tip that I'll throw out to you guys. Greg was talking about the Master, I've forgotten, it's Master something cleaner for your brushes. And Murphy's oil soap, for those of you that might have some in your kitchen to clean some of the woods around your house, cabinets, etc., works really, really well on brushes. And it also conditions your brushes. So Murphy's oil soap is another suggestion to use to clean your brushes.
Well, thank your wife.
Yeah. I always wondered what that was over there. I know she's got it in one of her little bins, but she's got it next to the big cake of the cleaner too. And I never thought to think about asking her that, and she just volunteered that information. So, that's just an idea there. The other thing that I would recommend here for you guys is this is just kind of a glue bin, but the point being here, this is nothing more than some blue tack. If you guys don't have blue tack hanging out, buy yourself a little package of it. It's more than worth its weight in gold. I just took a little piece of blue tack and I just stick it on here. And then you don't ever want to set a brush down so that it's like face down like that and crunching, particularly like sitting them in a fluid or something. But I go through and I'll clean my brush, and then when I'm done cleaning it, to keep the water and stuff from going back into that glue that's up here in the ferrule, I just stick it in the blue tack like that, and then it dries face down. And then when it gets dry, I just take it and stick it inside this is my brush holder, but you know, your brush holder, so that your brushes stay in better condition and shape. So that's another 29-cent suggestion. Any other thoughts, suggestions, ideas, questions, comments?
Hey, Chris, on the corners that you painted, can't you wait till it dries and then use some sandpaper to give you a better surface for the glue to grip on?
Absolutely, yes. And quite frankly, it's probably what I'm gonna end up doing. I just went through and I'm gonna move this here. Bear with me one quick second. I'm gonna get back to the computer so that I can talk to you guys. So when I get done painting, by the way, with my palettes, I'll just show you the rest of this. I just take my old towel that I've been working with and I wipe down the top of my palette real quick. If you've got some castings that are kind of sitting around, if it's an appropriate color, you can just dilute this out a little bit more and throw a wash over your castings. But particularly if you need to kind of, and then I just wipe out my water bin a little bit. It's primarily to help keep it from rusting, but and then I dry out the bin with a paper towel because that really soaks up the water. Anyway, so and that's how I clean my palette. Anyway, that's it. But yes, sanding those edges when it's dry. And again, that gets into the cure dry versus the touch dry. If you're gonna sand it off, I would recommend waiting until it is cure dried, not touch dried. That's my own personal recommendation. I don't know. Some of you guys that are woodworkers or have more knowledge on that one, please feel free to step up and say something.
I don't know if I'm a woodworker, but I know that I've had better success sanding something painted after a day of drying or something than very soon after. It just doesn't work as well.
Yeah, so what you're saying, you're agreeing there to allow it to cure dry versus touch dry.
Chris, what I found happens is your sandpaper will build up with the paint if you don't wait till it dries.
Yeah. And Will, I'm going back to my computer. So, all right. Well, guys, was that worth everybody's time today? Did anybody pick up anything of value besides the Murphy's oil soap?
Yeah, I'm going to use cooler water when I'm washing my brushes now.
Yeah, I always use just straight cold out of the tap.
But I always start
Yeah.
off with clean water. I know some people, they'll keep using the same water, days or weeks or something. And I suppose that could work just as well. I just don't.
Yeah, no, I'm right with you there, Greg. I tend to agree with you on that one. Every time I sit down at my workbench, before I sit down, I go grab a little tea candle holder of it. Yes. Uh-huh. Okay.
Then they repeat it, and rinse it, then you do it again, repeat it until they see clear water.
Okay.
So there's no color.
Okay, I'm being told by the artist over here that if you're going to use some of the soaps and things to clean your brushes, be it Murphy's or be it the other master cleaner, to get the dish or to get your brushes soapy and then to scrub the brush on your hand is probably the preferable way to do it. And then to, rinse the brush, get it soapy, and repeat that process until you are getting clear water. And then when it's clear, that's, yeah, clear suds, clear water, clear suds. And then that way you know that you've got it clean.
It usually takes 3 or 4 times.
So she's saying it takes 3 or 4 times. That's been my experience. I just clean it until my hand hurts, quite frankly. So I'll be upfront with you guys on that one. So let's see here. Anything else, gentlemen, for today? Well, for those guys that are going to be joining us later on this afternoon in the management meeting, I look forward to seeing you there. If you don't hang on for a few moments here, I'm going to go on ahead and kill the YouTube feed, and we'll have a brief discussion on the backside for those that wish to hang out. Otherwise, I again wanted to remind everybody just a couple of more weeks to get any orders for Heath's ice machine if you are in the States or in the Canada and you're interested in one, to get that out to me, because I'm going to cut that off here in another week to 2 weeks and get the orders placed, and for him to get them printed up so we can get them into the hands of everybody. And don't forget that we've only gotten about another 30 days or so on the use of the 15 days or so on the use of the DecoArt's discount if you're interested in picking up some soft pastels. And with that, I guess we'll call it a day. So everybody, happy modeling. Make sure to contribute some models to the my build on Wednesday and get your offers, your what do I want to say, contributions, whatever, into Chris, and get yourself published. Okay, everybody, have a good one, and thank you for joining us next week at the same old bat time. Thank you.